The Mississippi River flooding. It's supposed to happen. The river will swell at the beginning of spring when all the snow melts and rain starts to fall. But it's been getting worse. The river has been flooding faster and with larger amounts of water, destroying homes, mowing down crops, and sometimes even killing people. This flooding is serious, and we have been creating levees and spillways to help prevent a catastrophe. But are they working? Should we have left the natural ways the earth keeps the flooding from destroying everything? Well, I'm here to answer those questions, and more. Why is the river flooding? More specifically, why is the flooding getting more frequent and devastating? That is the most important question we can ask when referring to the Mississippi River flooding. Now, why is that? It's because if we know why the flooding is getting so bad, we can learn how to remove that factor and reduce flood devastation. So what is causing the flooding to be so much worse than normal? Well, there's a couple things. First off, there's the fact that the river always swells around springtime due to rain and snow melting and flowing into the river. In other words, flooding is natural and supposed to happen. But in the 1900s, the river didn't get high enough to damage property as much as it has been recently. The river used to flood once every decade compared to recently, where it's been happening every 2 to 4 years. That's because, due to climate change, it has been raining harder and longer over the Mississippi River, causing the river to swell way past flood level, causing millions of dollars in damages. The amount of damage the flooding is causing has also been increased by levees. It's ironic, considering levees were built to contain flooding and stop it from destroying homes or crops. And levees even work until a certain point. You see, levees are, according to the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, a man-made structure, usually an earthen embankment, designed and constructed in accordance with sound engineering practices to contain, control, or divert the flow of water so as to reduce risk from temporary flooding. The levees work well on a small scale. When a levee breaks, the water it contains will flow out, spreading over a large area very quickly, unlike when the river floods naturally, slowly filling up an area with water. This rush of water can cause a massive amount of damage, especially to crops. And the last thing that has really been helping the river floods become even worse is the fact that we have removed all of the natural floodplains. Floodplains are large open areas of plants that soak up all of the water from floods and even benefit from it. These floodplains have been helping to reduce the mass destruction of the Mississippi flooding since the Mississippi River came into existence, and us humans building homes and filling in the floodplains has left the water nowhere to go but into our homes and onto our fields, destroying lives and crops throughout Minnesota. Flooding affects us in many different ways, such as physically. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that floods can cause physical harm to buildings and people. I know I already told you what flooding can do, but I never talked about specifics. For example, May 2nd, 2019, Davenport, Iowa. The river floods were devastating, with the river reaching 22.7 feet, 7.7 feet above flood stage. This was a record high in Davenport. The baseball stadium was an island, and it took over 7 weeks to go below 18 feet, breaking yet another record. May 21st, 2019, Baton Rouge, Louisiana experienced its longest flood in history, extending far longer than the flood of 1927. I'll get to that later. One man was even found dead due to the flash flooding. May 28th, 2019, Red River Landing also experienced its longest flood ever, well surpassing the 135-day record set in 1927. Now we move on to one of the largest natural disasters in the history of the United States, the Great Flood of 1927. The Great Flood of 1927, or the Flood of 27, was a massive flood and commonly referred to as a 100-year flood. A 100-year flood is a flood event that has a 1 in 100 chance of being equaled or exceeded in any given year. This flood was extremely deadly, killing 246 people, placing it among the top 15 deadliest floods in U.S. history. Floods can damage us in other ways too, like financially. Floods cost millions, maybe billions of dollars in repair damages, hurting the nation financially. The flood of 1927, for example, it costed the U.S. government $41.1 billion. According to the NCEI, a subdivision of NOAA, the U.S. has been through 258 climate and weather disasters, totaling over $1 billion in cost. The total of these disasters nearing $1.75 trillion. These floods damage us in multiple different ways, like physically, one of the most impactful ways floods affect us, and financially, which doesn't seem as impactful until you look at the numbers. These two different ways that flooding affects us is why we need to help reduce flooding and save lives. Now, what can we do to fix this? Well, there are a couple things that we can do to help fix this problem. Let's start with the biggest issue, causing many problems, not just flooding, climate change. Climate change is the most important thing that needs to be fixed, not only because it causes the flooding, but of how much harm it's causing everywhere else. Climate change has been fluctuating and accentuating the Earth's temperatures. Tropical places getting snow, ice caps melting, Australia and California getting so dry that the smallest fire turned into a week-long forest fire, and it's causing more rain to fall over the Mississippi, causing the massive flooding we see today. To fix this humongous issue, we need to reduce our carbon emissions by stopping the use of fossil fuels and stopping people from cutting down trees for agricultural reasons. And reducing climate change will reduce the amount of rain over the Mississippi, overall keeping the water levels down in the Mississippi. We also need to restore our floodplains. Restoring the floodplains will be a big help in reducing the damage from floods, because, as I've said, floodplains allow water to flow somewhere when the river floods, keeping the damage from the floods minimal. It's a good thing that people are already trying to restore the floodplains. The Nature Conservancy have been trying to reconnect 750,000 acres of floodplains to the Mississippi during the last decade. Others have also been trying to restore the floodplains, such as the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which manages the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program and Wetland Reserve Easements, a program that buys parts of farmland vulnerable to flooding and converts the land back into floodplains and wetlands. So this is what we can do to fix the flooding on the Mississippi River. So, you may be wondering, why do I need to know this? Why do I need to learn about the Mississippi River flooding? Well, you need to know because this flooding is causing lives to be displaced, even destroyed. Homes wrecked, even people dead. You need to know so everyone can know. Because the more people who know, the more people help. And the more people help, the more lives saved. We need to stop this flooding, and we need to do it now.